Hey everyone, it's a Thursday, so it's time for another OTTTT, Occupational Therapy Tools and Tips Thursdays. And yes, you notice I'm working with scissors and we have paper here, so that means we're gonna talk about cutting skills today. There are three things that you have to look for when you're working on cutting with your kids. First one is safety awareness. Number two is the scissor grasp. And number three is the sitting position. For safety awareness, you just want to make sure that your child is aware that scissors are harmful. We know there are kids who start exploring scissors by biting them or looking at the sharp part because it's something new for them. So with that, you can start with the plastic scissors to make sure that they can get used to the open, closing movement of the scissors and how they can position their hands, their fingers in holding the scissors. What lets me know that we can move on to the metal, the real scissors, is that they're using the scissors already in cutting paper, and we know how frustrating cutting with plastic scissors are, right? So when I notice them using the plastic scissors and it doesn't cut the paper, that's when I let them try the metal scissors already. By then, I know that number one, they're aware somehow of safety precautions that they need to take while cutting, and number two, they're already aware that scissors are tools for cutting objects. Number two is the scissor grasp. And the first action that they need to take is the alternate flexion or the bending of the fingers and the extending or the straightening of fingers, which is what we need for opening and closing the scissors, right? So this is the first action that they need to learn, and the first thing that they can do when cutting paper are snips, like this one. So these are the patterns or the lines that we expect them to do first when introducing cutting. So you have open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close. So no forward movement is expected yet, and they just stick at the edge of the paper. For the scissor grasp, we actually have the thumb in one hole, the middle finger in the second hole, and the index finger is actually for support at the bottom. That is why we have these scissors who have a longer hole on one side in comparison to these scissors that have the same size, because for the longer hole, this is where you put the thumb, the middle, and instead of putting the index finger outside, we just put them in the same space. Lastly, we have the sitting position. When you think of cutting, you think that 100% happens in the hands, but the sitting posture actually influences the quality of cutting that a child can produce. Here's a secret tip that I use with all of my kids when we start cutting. You will notice that when they don't have good control over their trunk muscles as well as their shoulder and arm muscles, that they will cut this way. So they lift up this way, hold the paper here, or if they don't know how to use both hands yet, they will let it stick on the table and just cut this way. Okay, so they'll go start from outward, going in, even if you give instructions that they have to start from this side moving forward. So when they do this one, when they cut, you just need to stick a sheet of paper, put it here, and tell them to not let it fall down. So they will press this between their trunk and their arm, and then they will hold the paper like this so that they will start here and then move forward. If you want a more comprehensive guide on how to have the optimal sitting position for cutting, you can get more tips in our video on how to create a playroom/study room for improving your child's focus and attention. We have tips there on how to improve your child's sitting position that prepares them for fine motor skills like cutting. When teaching cutting skills, we can start with this simple sequence in teaching from the simplest, which means it needs the least amount of fine motor control, leading to the more complex cutting skills. So with that, we start with the snips. As we said earlier, we only cut at the edge, no forward movement from the hand yet, and you will practice this movement until they get more refined or they can already get used to lifting the paper off the table. The next level is we work with better fine motor control. So that means we will work with these lines. You start with thicker lines, which are easier, and it gets more difficult the thinner the lines get. Because the task here is for the child to stay within the lines and they shouldn't cut outside of it. Lastly, you can have lines with different lengths, and the task here is for your child to stop at the end of the line. So that means it's easier for your child to cut across the entire paper because there's no stop needed. And then it will be followed by longer lines, and they get shorter and shorter and shorter until they control how to stop even with very tiny lines. After this, you can already work on simple geometric patterns like cutting a circle, a square, or a triangle. And then after that one, you will work with more complex patterns like pictures of animals or vehicles. For mastery, you can already let your child cut other materials aside from thin paper. You can let them cut thicker board paper or illustration board, and even more difficult are the thinner materials that require more control, such as tissue paper or Japanese paper. Happy cutting week, and that's it for another OTTTT Occupational Therapy Tools and Tips Thursday. See you next Thursday.